Hello everyone, am I audible? Hello everyone, am I audible? Please tell me yes or no. Hello, have I gone live? Yes or no? Okay, so once again, a very warm hello to all of you. This is Pradeep Sengupta, your VA mentor and friend, and we are done and dusted with CAT. So please tell me, how did it go? We have been having awesome sessions on analysis, comprehensive and extensive analysis on DIQA, English, so on and so forth. Ella, Pranab sir, Vikas sir, Saral sir, Gautam sir, Nikita ma'am, Savitri ma'am, they have been awesome with their analysis. And I hope you might have been enjoying the sessions with us. And yes, we are a few in India who are bringing you the question to question, cut to cut analysis of all the slots of CAT 21. So today we are here with the analysis of slot 3 VARC. So first of all, let me ask you this question: how did it go? So how many of us are joining? Let me check. Yeah, grandfather clock question. Yes, we are going to discuss the grandfather clock question. Also, I have heard that students, had a harrowing time dealing with that question, with that passage, sorry. And we are going to discuss in detail the grandfather clock passage also. Now that we have the response sheet in our hands, just in case you don't have the response sheet, please be ready with the response sheet quickly so that we can start the discussion. We are going to have fun today. So CAT, we are through with. What best we could do, we did. Now we are waiting for the other exams. IFT is in line, SNAP is lined up, ZAT is lined up. Uh, Athar, hi Athar. Apparently, one of the questions is suspected to be wrong in the entropy passage. If you could touch upon that question. Okay, fine. I will try to do that, Athar. In fact, we are going to discuss all the questions of the passages. Along with that, we will touch base the verbal logic section, the analytical reasoning section also. So, what do we have in store today? So we are going to talk about the format of CAT. It has been the same. Couple of RCs, four RCs, four questions in each passage for each passage, followed by a few verbal logic questions. So 4 into 4 was the matrix, followed by 8 more questions on verbal logic. All right. Hi Vishal. Good evening. So, one by one, we are going to talk about the passages. People have been talking a lot about the passages being difficult, the passages being uphill, some of the passages being easy. But I think, yes, right, the passages are as easy as we understand them. It is directly proportional to our understanding of the passage and the type of English language, the kind of language that was used to bring home the essence of it. So we are not going to talk about the how of RC or the why of RC. We are just going to, stick to the detailed analysis of the passages and what we chose and what should have been chosen, right? So that is how we are going to keep the session today. So we are going to do each and every passage together. We will read the passage together and we will try to sort out the answers. We are going to do the analysis and it would be better if we could talk. Hi Vishal, good evening. Okay, so he says the passage went so, the VA section goes so, but students have been telling us that slot 3 VRC in fact was a little on the easier side. Slot 1 and slot 2 was abstruse and students have had a harrowing time dealing with the VRC section of slot 1 and slot 2. So slot 3 was slightly on the easier side. I mean, that is what the trend tells us. But whether it was easy or not, it is up to us to decide and discuss. All right. So without any further ado, let us start with the discussion of the passages. And remember, those who are taking CAT 22, it'll be an eye opener for you. That it'll give you, a kind of an insight into how the passages look like in CAT, and what you can expect next year. For those who have actually been through the grind, nothing to say, we will just discuss, and I hope that you shoot through the roof as far as your percentile is concerned. With that being said, let us get going with the very first passage, question number 124. So this passage was on Noam Chomsky. Okay, and it was a passage based on language. You might have observed that over the years, over the months, Nikita ma'am and Savitri ma'am have been doing awesome passages with you, and many of the passages I have observed, was based on grammar and language. So those of you who have attended the sessions of these two awesome trainers might have found out that this passage was not at all difficult, right? Going by the questions, we will try and figure out what the options should have been. So let us get going with the very first passage, okay? And we will try to read it slowly, right? And then quickly we will move on to the questions, right? But let me show you the question first of all. The first question was on the basis of the information in the passage. Pinker and Chomsky may disagree with each other on one of the following topics. The questions are, quite new, right? The type of questions asked, was largely inferential. There were no direct questions asked, but then the questions were easier to understand and analyze. Okay, so let us see what the passage is all about. So starting in 1957, Noam Chomsky proclaimed a new doctrine. So we're talking about a new doctrine in the passage. And what is this? This is about language being the most human of all attributes. We're talking about the human attributes, or the most human, the attributes which make us human, and language is one attribute that is the USP of the humankind. Okay, this is what the first line tells you. So the first couple of lines will help us understand the difficulty level of the passage, the LOD of the passage. All right. So to each his own. It may be subjective. It will vary from person to person and student to student. I found the passage to be interesting, neither tough nor difficult. It was interesting. So it says, language, the most human of all attributes, was innate, intrinsic, something which lies within. Okay, so this attribute was innate. The grammatical faculty was built into the infant brain, and your average 3-year-old was not a mere apprentice in the great enterprise of absorbing English from his parents, but a linguistic genius. Try to connect. So this infant is not an apprentice, but a linguistic genius, right? The author says even an infant is a genius because he's born with this innate attribute, that is language. Since this message was couched, hidden in terms of Chomskyan theoretical linguistic in discourse, so opaque, something which cannot be seen through, right? It was present, but it was actually missed by many of the scholars, that it was nearly incomprehensible even to some scholars. Many people did not hear it. Now, in brilliant, witty, and altogether satisfying book, Mr. Chomsky's colleague Steven Pinker has brought Mr. Chomsky's finding to every man, and this is the book we are talking about. The book was brought out by Mr. Chomsky and Mr. Pinker, and he was Mr. Chomsky's colleague. And what has he gathered? He has gathered persuasive data. Okay, the data that can persuade your thinking from such diverse field as cognitive neuroscience, developmental psychology, and speech therapy to make up his points. And when he disagrees with Mr. Chomsky, he tells you. So there are two things that stem out from the first passage. Number one, we know that Steven Pinker and Chomsky, they were colleagues, and although they have had their own set of agreements, Pinker on certain points might have differed from Chomsky, and when he did so, he was blatant and he was open about it. So the first passage was very easy. It was, the first paragraph, I'm sorry, was easy to the mind, and you could easily understand what actually the paragraph is trying to bring home. Look at the second paragraph. For Mr. Chomsky and Mr. Pinker, somewhere in the human brain, there is a complex. Now, look at this line. For Mr. Chomsky and Mr. Pinker, right? Both of them. It shows what? It shows a degree of agreement. Somewhere in the human brain, there is a complex set of neural circuits that have been programmed with super rules, making up what Mr. Chomsky calls universal grammar. Chomsky calls it universal grammar, and does Mr. Pinker agree with it? He does so. And that these rules are unconscious and instinctive. Okay, these are unconscious and instinctive. Remember, we have a passage to grapple with that is largely based on unconscious. We are going to have fun with that paragraph as well, with that passage as well. Half a century ago, this would have been poo-pooed as, rubbished as, poo-pooed as, look at the expression, as a black box theory, since one could not actually pinpoint this grammatical faculty in a specific part of the brain. So earlier on, if we had been talking about it, it would have been brushed under the carpet, okay? Or describe its functioning. But now, things are different. And neurosurgeons have now found this, what? This black box, right? Which was earlier on considered not being present, and it is situated around the Broca's area on the left side of the forebrain. So we know what we are talking about, the faculty of grammar, the language, right? The unit, it is present in the brain somewhere. That is what this paragraph tells you. Okay, while the second paragraph talks about agreement, the third paragraph, right, it focuses on disagreement between Mr. Chomsky and Mr. Pinker. Unlike Mr. Chomsky, Mr. Pinker firmly places the wiring of the brain for language within the framework of Darwinian natural selection and evolution. It is very clear that Mr. Chomsky, he does not believe in the Darwinian natural selection and evolution, whereas Mr. Pinker does believe in it. And this is where the difference lies. Okay, all right. Okay, jaldi se apne doston ko bula ke le aao. Please join. Please let your friends know that we are into the analysis of slot 3 VARC. He effectively disposes of, who? Mr. Pinker. He effectively disposes of all claims that intelligent non-human primates like chimps have any abilities to learn and use language. So Mr. Pinker tells us that intelligent non-human primates, okay, point to be noted over here, they do not have abilities to learn and use language. Although they are intelligent, but they don't have the ability to learn a language. It is not that chimps lack vocal apparatus, right? Given that they have vocal apparatus, it is just that their brains are unable to produce or use grammar. So the faculty, the much talked about faculty, quote unquote, which is present in the human mind, is not present in the chimps, despite the fact that they have vocal apparatus. So a marked difference, lies glaringly in the passage that speaks volumes about the difference between humans and the chimps in terms of grammar and the use of language. On the other hand, the language instinct, when it first appeared among our most distant hominid ancestors, have given them a selective reproductive advantage. Okay, so this language instinct gave them a reproductive advantage that was selective. He says it was selective over their competitors. So, concluding the passage, to Mr. Pinker, the roots of language must be in the genes. Okay, this is a very, very strong assumption being drawn by Mr. Pinker. According to Mr. Pinker, the roots of the language must be in the genes. Must be in the genes, but there cannot be a grammar gene. Anymore, then there can be gene for the heart or any other complex body structure. This idea, this proposition will undoubtedly raise the hackles of some behavioral psychologists. It may annoy a few behavioral psychologists. This finding of Mr. Pinker and psychologists and anthropologists for because it apparently contradicts the liberal idea that human behavior may be changed for better may be changed for the better by improvement in culture and environment, and it might seem to invite twin bugaboos of biological determinism and racism. Okay, so outrightly Mr. Pinker challenges this idea, which otherwise would have been trending had this finding not been there, which Mr. Pinker has been able to discover. Yet Mr. Pinker stresses one point that should allay such fears. What kind of fear is being allayed by Mr. Pinker? Even though there are 4,000 to 6,000 languages today, they are sufficiently alike. Look at this line. Languages are alike in spite of the diversity of the languages, languages being many in number, yet the languages are sufficiently alike to be considered one language by what? By an extraterrestrial observer. In other words, most of the diversity of the world's culture, so beloved to anthropologists, is superficial and minor compared to similarities. So when you talk about the differences, when you talk about this diversity, we are not talking about these diversity. They're insignificant, when we compare them with the languages compared to the similarities. So there are more similarities than dissimilarities. Racial differences are literally only skin deep. Okay, the essence. Racial differences are just skin deep. They can be ignored. They can be insignificant. The fundamental unity of humanity is the theme of Mr. Chomsky's universal grammar and of this exciting book. The last line of the paragraph draws the essence, the sum and substance of what is being spoken about language. Now, can we hit the questions? Okay. All right. On the basis of the information, look at the question. On the basis of the information in the passage, Pinker and Chomsky may disagree. Now, when we talk about disagreement, that should take us to paragraph 3. And what was the point of disagreement? Darwinian natural selection. So don't you think the answer should be 1? The language instinct is not what the point of difference is all about. The possibility of a universal grammar, true, but is this the point of difference? The passage does not say so. The inborn language acquisition skills of human, yes, it is there, but is this the point of difference? No, the point of difference comes out clearly in para 3, the very first line. So the answer was 1. All right. 2 can be eliminated, 3 can be eliminated, 4 can be eliminated. So 1 should have been the answer. Okay. Then it says you can keep the response sheet right in front of you, and as and when we discuss the passage, please feel free to talk to me so that we can actually talk about the disagreements that we may have in the due course of time. And also, I would like you to talk to me about your inputs. Contribute by sharing your inputs about this passage. Okay. Did you find the passage easy or difficult? I did not. I don't think the passage was difficult. It was doable. It was pretty doable. Okay. 2 says, according to the passage, all of the following are true about the language except. All are true. Which one is not true? Which one is not true? It confers, language confers an evolutionary reproductive advantage. Doesn't the passage talk about it? Right? It does talk about in the 3rd paragraph. Okay? The language instinct, we have been talking about the language instinct, at the very outset since right from the 1st paragraph. Right? I'm sorry. All intelligent primates are gifted with it. Language, all intelligent primates are gifted with it. All intelligent primates are gifted with language. Is this what the passage tell us? Developments in neuroscience have increased its acceptance. quite far-fetched. Not all intelligent primates are gifted with it. So between 2 and 4, what should you choose? The answer actually is 2. All intelligent primates are gifted with it. This is not true. This is false. It confers an evolutionary reproductive advantage. Yes. Development in neuroscience have increased its acceptance. Can be inferred. Not all intelligent primates are gifted with it. The passage tells us that. Okay. What it does not tell us. All intelligent primates are gifted with it. No, chimps are not gifted with it. So this should have been the answer. Okay, the second one should have been the answer. Let's look at the third question. Okay, look at how the questions have been worded. It says, from the passage, it can be inferred that all of the following are true about Pinker's book. Okay, what does Pinker's book tell us, and what are those truths that we have come across in the passage? What is the book? The language instinct, except that Pinker. Except that Pinker, all can be inferred. It can be inferred that all of the following are true. Okay? Is this true or false? 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 Okay? All are true about Pinker's book except. All are true about Pinker's book except. Okay? What is the answer? Pinker's book writes in a different style from Chomsky. Disagrees with Chomsky's on certain grounds, draws extensively from Chomsky's propositions, draws from behavioral psychology theory, draws extensively from Chomsky's propositions, disagrees with Chomsky on certain grounds, writes in a different style from Chomsky. Right? Now, what is the question? It can be inferred that all the following are true. All of the following are true except one. One is not true. Right? The answer is 4, draws from behavioral psychology theory. This book actually draws inspiration. Look at what Mr. Pinker agrees with. He agrees with the framework of Darwinian natural selection. Right? This is what he draws his points from. But when you look at this question, except that Pinker draws from behavioral psychology theory, all can be inferred, only this is not going to be the case. Hence, 4 is the answer. So 4 should have been the answer for question number 3. Let us look at question 4. Which of the following statements best summarizes the author's position about Pinker's? Okay, what is the summary? For this question, let us go back to the passage and let me take you to the last couple of lines over here. Okay, what was Chomsky's argument? What was his idea? The idea was the theme of humanity. The fundamental unity of humanity is the theme of Mr. Chomsky's universal grammar and of this book. Racial difference, he has done away with. He does not talk about racial differences. Right? If you look at the question, culture and environment play a key role in shaping our acquisition of language. Is this what we are talking about, culture and environment? 2 says, anatomical developments like the voice box play a key role in determining language acquisition skill. Voice box is present in the chimps, but they don't have language skills. So, can this be the answer? 3 says, the evolutionary and deterministic framework of Pinker's book makes it racist. Okay, if you look at the last paragraph, we are far away from being racist, right? 4 says, the universality of the language instinct counters the claims that Pinker's book is racist. So what, according to you, should have been the answer? The response sheet is right in front of you. In this case also, the best answer is 4. We are talking about the universality of the language instinct, and it has got nothing to do with the book being racist. The book is not racist. Genia Josephs asks me this question, sir, if I score 21 marks, what percentile will I get? We will talk about the percentile thing in a few moments, Joseph. If you could just allow me that much of time. Arthur, thanks a lot, sir. Having a conversation would be really great, helpful. Let's have the conversation. Ask me questions, and I will be more than happy to answer it. Let us uh, stick to the analysis of the paper, and then we can talk about the percentile and the other areas which you might like to ask me questions on. Okay. So the first passage was fairly easy. The questions were absolutely inferential, but they were easy enough to choose. They were easy enough to be answered, right? So 1 to 4, I think most of you should have got the answers right. Okay, so the first passage, LOD, out of 10, I think the LOD should be, I mean, out of 10, I should say the level of understanding should have been more than 80%. Okay, so out of 4 questions, I think you should get at least 3 of them right. And if you get all the 4 right, I won't be surprised. Okay, so that was passage number 1. Always remember, in the passages, the level of difficulty arises because we do not know where to look for the right answers. Okay, the problem with us is we do not know where to look for. Okay, you can purchase happiness if you just know the right shop, right? Similarly, you can get the answers right if you just know where to look, right? So the first passage, easily done, completed. Let's move on to the next passage. Okay, so here comes the conundrum. Here comes the passage that we have been waiting for. Okay, grandfather clock, Dadaji ki ghadi, so to speak of, right? We have been talking about, and the rest of India is talking about, students have been talking about the grandfather's clock passage. If you say it was difficult, I would agree with you. I admit, I agree that it was difficult. Not at all doable, I don't think so. At least you could have answered a few questions. Yes, it was difficult. Now, if I give you all the day to solve this passage, I can bet my money you will get all the answers right. Okay, but given the time frame and the constraint and the pressure you have been exposed to, I think getting the answers was a bit uphill. But if you read the questions properly, while the passage was difficult, were the questions difficult? Is something which we need to answer. Okay, so how many of you found this passage difficult? I think most of you found this passage difficult. The same goes with me. So I am on the same page with you all. Okay, with that being said, now CAT, the VARC section or the quant section or the DI section, it's a matter of the right selection of questions. The questions which we can do easily that can see us through the paper. All right. So if you found it difficult, let us see where the difficulty lay and how we could have addressed that difficult area or the difficulty, so to speak of. Okay. So the passage begins with keeping time accurately comes with a price. Okay, it rings a bell. Keeping time accurately comes with a price. So timekeeping is what we are talking about. The first couple of lines will tell us where actually we are trying to move. The maximum accuracy of a clock is directly related to how much disorder or entropy it creates every time it ticks. So the ticking of a clock will result in disorder or entropy. The ticking of a clock will result in disorder or entropy is what the first line is all about. This lady, Natalia Ares, at the University of Oxford and her colleagues made this discovery using a tiny clock with an accuracy that can be controlled. So they used a clock with an accuracy, right, that could be controlled by them. And now comes the details of the clock. The clock consists of a 50 nanometer thick membrane of silicon nitride vibrated by an electric current. Each time the membrane moved up and down once and then returned to its original position, the researchers counted a tick and the regularity of the spacing between the ticks represented the accuracy of the clock, right? It is important for us to understand which part of the passage is relevant or irrelevant. Okay, we are not supposed to read anything and everything, and that is where skimming and scanning comes into the picture. The researchers found that as they increased the clock's accuracy, now this is where the passage gets interesting, the first para gets interesting. Now, when the moment you increase the accuracy of the clock, what happens? The heat produced in the system grew, right? The heat produced grows, increasing the entropy or disorder of its surroundings by jostling, pushing nearby particles. Okay, so every time you try to increase clock's accuracy, two things are happening: heat is being produced, and there is larger disorder. There is larger disorder, and then comes somebody's quote: if a clock is more accurate, you are paying for it somehow. You are paying for it somehow. How are we paying? In terms of what? Is it clear? If the clock is more accurate, you're paying for it. How are we paying for it? Can it be inferred from the information given in the first para? A simple yes or no. Yes or no? Can you write a Y for yes and no and N for a no? What kind of, how are we paying for this? If the clock is accurate, we are paying for it. How are we paying for the clock if it is accurate? Is it clear? It does produce heat. Yes, it does create entropy. Yes, but how are we paying for it? Is it clear to us? We do not know. Says Aris, in this case, you pay for it by pouring more ordered energy into the clock. Now comes the answer. Right? Now, how are we paying for it? By pouring more ordered energy. Right? Again, energy in terms of what? In terms of heat? In terms of entropy, we do not know. Right? Which is then converted into entropy. This energy is converted into entropy. This is how we are paying. Now, question have been answered. By measuring time, we are increasing the entropy of the universe. Says Harris. By measuring time, we are increasing the disorder in the universe. Okay. The more entropy there is in the universe, the closer it may be for its eventual demise. Okay, it rings an alarm over here. Okay, bigger the disorder, the bigger are the chances of the universe's demise. Okay, maybe we should stop measuring time, says Aris. The scale of the additional entropy is so small, though, that there is no need to worry about its effects, she says, which means that entropy, the amount of entropy being caused, is so insignificant that we should have to stop worrying about it. This is what the first para tells us. But what kind of question are we supposed to answer by getting all the information? A form of heat is the effect and not the cause, right? Right? Form of heat is the effect and not the cause. Absolutely right. So ticking, now form of heat is the effect. Now what is the cause? Don't you think the ticking of the clock is the cause that produces heat? Oh well, if I am reading your name all right. All right. Then comes the next paragraph. What does it talk about? The increase in entropy in timekeeping may be related to the arrow of time. The arrow of time. Okay. Now this design will tell us largely about what we are heading towards. Says Marcus Huber that a clock that creates the most possible entropy would be maximally accurate. I'm so sorry. I jumped into the next paragraph. Okay. Arrow of time, says Marcus Huber. What does he say? Okay, this is what he says. The increase in entropy in timekeeping may be related to an arrow of time. Okay. It has been suggested that the reason that time only flows forward, not in reverse, is that the total amount of entropy in the universe is constantly increasing creating disorder that cannot be put in order again. We cannot go back. If you look at the arrow of time, we cannot go back. So the level of entropy is growing. Okay, so we cannot go back. This is one reading that we can understand, that we can, and this is one line of thought that comes out from the second paragraph. Okay, the third paragraph tells us the relationship that the researcher found is a limit on accuracy of a clock. So it doesn't mean that a clock that creates the most possible entropy would be maximally accurate. Okay, now see over here, right? Ticking of a clock may cause entropy, but the clock that creates most possible entropy, it does not mean that it has to be accurate. Okay, hence a large inefficient grandfather clock, okay, the clock from the yesteryears, isn't more precise because even the tick of the grandfather clock will cause entropy, isn't more precise than an atomic clock. Okay, both the clocks tick and they cause entropy, but that does not mean that the inefficient grandfather clock is more precise than an atomic clock. They may be as precise as the other, but it cannot be concluded that grandfather clock being inefficient, okay, whether we, although we call it insufficient, it does not mean that it is more precise than the atomic clock. And then comes the example, then comes the analogy. Okay, the author tries to bring home his point with the help of an example. The example comes over here. It's a bit like fuel used in a car. Just because I'm using more fuel doesn't mean that I'm going faster or further, says Hugh. Okay, so by this analogy, he has proven that inefficient grandfather clock is not more precise than the atomic clock. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about entropy, we're talking about time, we're talking about so many things. Okay, so I hope, Utkarsh, this line is clear. I hope you've understood the analogy over here. Right? So this has been proven with the help of this example. This was just an example to prove that inefficient grandfather clock isn't more precise than the atomic clock. Okay? All right. This was the analogy drawn. All right. So when we discuss, we try to understand and get the essence of it eventually. When the researchers compared their results with theoretical models developed for clocks that rely on quantum effects, they were surprised to find that the relationship between accuracy and entropy seemed to be the same for both. Okay, there was no increase or decrease. It is the same, right? We can't be sure yet that these results are actually universal. Whether these are universal or not, we do not know. But this is what has come out from the experiments. Okay, accuracy and entropy seem to be same for both. All right. Though, because there are many types of clocks for which the relationship between accuracy and entropy haven't been tested. Okay, it is unclear how this principle plays out in real devices such as atomic clocks. Okay, if you apply this over here, how this principle will play out, what effect will it have in the future, we do not know because we are yet to test it, which push the ultimate quantum limits of accuracy. Okay. There's Mark Mitchison at Trinity College, Dublin in Ireland. Understanding this relationship could be helpful. Could be helpful. Okay. Look at the inputs that you get. It could be helpful for designing clocks in the future, particularly those used in quantum computers. Okay, so understanding this relationship, okay, between entropy and accuracy will help you design quantum computers and other devices which where both accuracy and temperature are crucial. So when you design quantum computers and other devices, what are crucial? Both accuracy and temperature are crucial. Okay, the author has told you this, right? And the author is reporting Aris. Okay, it is Aris's comment. This finding could also help us understand more generally how the quantum world and the classical world are similar and different in terms of thermodynamics and the passage of time. Although the passage was a bit uphill, okay, but a little bit of attention, on the details could have helped you understand, the essence of it, the logic behind this, this passage overall. But if you did not get it in the first reading, I will not blame you, right? Because it was definitely technical and too many, scientific jargon, was there to bamboozle the students, to actually, to make them nervous. So if you have left this passage out, I cannot blame you myself. Let's look at the first question. It's a bit like fuel use in. Just because I'm using more fuel doesn't mean that I'm going faster or further. What is the purpose of this example? Now, if you read all the explanation and the options properly and clearly, you will understand that. Let's read option 1. If you go faster in a car, you will tend to consume more fuel. But the converse is not necessarily true. In the same way, increased entropy does not necessarily mean greater accuracy. Okay, grandfather clock, let me take you back. Grandfather clock isn't more precise than an atomic clock. Okay, can we read into the essence over here? Can we apply that analogy over here, right over here? 2 says the further you go in a car, the more fuel you use. In the same way, the faster you go in a car, the less time you use. Can this justification be brought home with this example? Can we justify this? 3 says, if you measure the speed of a car with a grandfather clock, now what is this analogy? Where are we going? Okay, the result will be different than if you measured it with an atomic clock. Where has this come into the picture? Right? This is completely irrelevant. Right? It does not go in line and theme of the passage. Are we here to compare a car with a grandfather clock? Right? Give me a break. Can 3 be the option? No, right? It is ridiculous, right? So 3 can be eliminated. Even if you read the first couple of lines, you can eliminate it, immediately. 4 says the further and faster you go in a car, the greater amount of fuel you will use, the greater amount of heat produced, and hence the greater the entropy. It is a bit like fuel use in a car. Just because I'm using more fuel doesn't mean 4 goes against the very fabric of this stone. Don't you think so? So in this case, the best answer is 5. It brings home the essence fairly and squarely. If you go faster in a car, you will tend to consume more fuel. But the converse is not necessarily true, which means if you go slow, that does not mean you will consume less fuel. Okay, so 1 should have been the answer. I hope you got this one right, all of you. All right. Which one of the following sets of words and phrases serves best as keywords for the passage? Remember, we did a lot of smart words and phrases techniques in RC passages when we were doing RC passages, right? 1 says electric current, heat, quantum effects. Does the passage talk about any of these? Heat? Yes. But what about electric current and quantum effects? Silicon nitride, energy, grandfather clock. Grandfather clock, yes. I mean, that is the talk of the town right now. Measuring time, accuracy, entropy, membrane, arrow of time, entropy. What do you think is the answer? We are trying to measure time, we are trying to talk about accuracy, we are trying to talk about entropy. So 3 is the best answer of the 4. So this serves the best keyword for the passage. So 1 and 2 can be eliminated. Electric current was just a passing reference. It was used quite minutely in the passage. Quantum effects, we haven't spoken much about quantum effects. Membrane, arrow of time, entropy doesn't make any sense. Entropy, yes. Arrow of time, yes. But what are we talking about? The passage largely talks about measuring time, accuracy, entropy. That is why 3 should have been the option over here. So 6 is quite easily done. Can we look at the 7th question? Right? What does the 7th question tell us? None of the following statement can be inferred except one can be inferred. One can be inferred. One says only one can be inferred. I don't mean option 1, but one can be inferred. What is that? The arrow of time has not yet been tested for atomic clocks. 2 says quantum computers are likely to produce more heat and hence more entropy because of the emphasis on the clock's accuracy. 3 says grandfather clocks are likely to produce less heat and hence less entropy because they are not as accurate. 4 says a clock with a 50 nanometer thick membrane of silicon nitride has been made to vibrate, producing electric current. Okay. Uh, Please talk to me, message me so that I can answer your questions, guys. So, for question number 7, none of the following can be inferred except only one can be inferred. First says the arrow of time has not yet been tested for atomic clocks. This cannot be inferred from the passage because we have spoken about the arrow of time in an entirely different context. 2 says 2 says quantum computers are likely to produce more heat, hence more entropy because of emphasis on the clock's accuracy. If you go back to the passage, right, and if you come down somewhere here, right, we are talking about something similar. We are talking about something similar over here. What are we talking about? Right? We are saying that if you read this passage once again, right, this paragraph once again, when the researchers compared their results with theoretical models developed for clocks, they rely on quantum effects. They were surprised to find the relationship between accuracy and entropy seemed to be the same for both, right? We can't be sure yet, and entropy haven't been tested. Entropy haven't been tested. It is still unclear how this principle plays out in real devices such as atomic clocks, which push ultimate quantum limits of accuracy. So if you look at 2 and 3, sorry, yeah, right? One is entirely different. A clock with a 50 nanometer thick membrane. It was actually the functionality that we have spoken about in the very first paragraph, right? So this is out of question. So we are stuck between 2 and 3, guys. Okay. 3 says grandfather clocks are likely to produce less heat and hence less entropy because they are not accurate. Just because they are not accurate does not mean that they will not produce heat, right? They tick, and if they tick, they have to produce heat. Quantum computers are likely to produce more heat and hence more entropy because of the emphasis on their clock's accuracy. And this is what we are trying to explore in the last paragraph. So the response sheet tells us that 2 should have been the option and not 3. Right? Priyansh, I think you got the answer. I hope you have the response sheet with you. So 2 or 3, it is 2 and not 3, Priyansh. Okay, this should have been the option, right? None of the following statement can be inferred. These cannot be inferred. Only 2 can be inferred, and that too on the basis of the last paragraph, the last couple of lines that talks largely about the atomic computers, the atomic clock. All right. So 2 should have been the answer, right, for question number 7. Moving on, right? Such lovely structure of questions over here that author makes all of the following arguments except, right? कौन सा argument वो नहीं दे रहा है आपको? The argument which does not place at all. Okay, the author makes all of the arguments in the passage except. I hope Priyanshi got the answer, right? The relationship between accuracy and entropy may not apply to all clocks. Is this what the exception is? Researchers found that the heat produced in a system is the price paid for increased accuracy of measurement. There is no difference in accuracy between an inefficient grandfather clock and an atomic clock. In designing clocks for quantum computers, both precision and heat have to be taken into account. The author makes which of the following arguments except? Which of the arguments the author does? Which of the argument the author does not make? Right? The relationship between accuracy and entropy may not apply to all clocks. It can be inferred from the passage. The moment you compare the grandfather clock with the other clocks, okay, so this tells you that accuracy and entropy, okay, the relationship between these two may not apply to all clocks, right? It may be, just maybe, what the passage is trying to bring home. 2 says researchers found that heat produced. What did the researchers find? That the heat produced in a system is the price paid for increased accuracy and measurement. Okay, but the passage tells you that we don't have to worry about the heat. Okay, the universe's demise is absolutely it's farthest, right? It is not even true. We are not talking about it. Okay. 3 says there is no difference in accuracy between an inefficient grandfather clock and atomic clock. This can be inferred from the passage going by the analogy. There is no difference. It's all the same, right? 4 says in designing clocks for quantum computers, both precision and heat have to be taken into account. It can be understood from the last couple of lines. When we design atomic clocks, right, you have to consider the heat and precision equally. So all these can be inferred. What cannot be inferred is, right, although we are talking about heat being produced in a system, and is this the price we are paying for the increased accuracy? This cannot be inferred. So the author makes all the arguments except 2. So in this case 2 should have been the answer, guys. All right, okay. So passage 2, yes, it was difficult, but then if you look at the questions, this is how we should have been able to, we should have looked at the questions like this. Okay, every passage comes with an analysis, every paragraph comes with an analysis, and every paragraph tells you a story. Okay, so this was how this passage should have been addressed. Okay, can we move on to the next passage now? Very quickly. Shubham says 3 can be inferred. Yes, 3 can be inferred. What cannot be inferred is 2. Okay, the author makes all the following arguments in the passage except what he does not make. 2 is the answer. Okay, all right. Okay. Another equally interesting passage. What is it all about? It talks about the unconscious. And look at the article used, right? Today we can hardly conceive of ourselves without an unconscious. We can hardly conceive of ourselves without an unconscious. Okay, Rudranil, how can we assume about inefficiency about grandfather clock and atomic clock? I think we have moved further into this passage. Rudranil, if I have time, I'll go back to the passage and I will talk about it. Okay, it's a promise. Okay, so some of the questions were a bit contentious, controversial, yes, but let us stick to the discussion of this passage and then we will move on to, I'll take you back to the grandfather clock passage once again, guys. Okay? All right. So let's start the discussion. What are we talking about? Something called an unconscious. Today we can hardly conceive, imagine of ourselves without an unconscious. What does it mean? Okay? It means that we as human beings, we live with something called unconscious. What is it? Yet, between 1700 and 1900, this notion developed as a genuinely original thought. Okay, the unconscious burst the shell of conventional language, right? It redefined the already existing language and gave it a new meaning. It gave it a new meaning. Okay, it burst the shell of conventional language coined as it had been to embody the fleeting ideas, as it had been to embody to the fleeting ideas and shifting conceptions of several generations until finally it became fixed and defined in specialized terms within the realm of medical psychology and Freudian analysis. All right, so this is what we are talking about, the unconscious. The vocabulary concerning the soul and the mind increased enormously. What increased? The vocabulary increased. What kind of vocabulary? That concerns the soul and the mind in the course of the 19th century. All right. The enrichments of literary and intellectual language led to an altered understanding of the meanings that underlie time-honored expression, that gives credence to, that gives importance to time-honored expressions and traditional catchwords. Okay. At the same time, once coined, powerful new ideas attracted to themselves a whole host of seemingly unrelated issues, practices, and experiences, creating a peculiar network of preoccupations that, as a group, had not existed before. The drawn out attempt to approach and define the unconscious brought together the spiritualist and the psychical uh, researcher of borderline phenomena such as apparitions, spectral illusions, haunted houses, mediums, trance, automatic writing, a host of new expressions came into vogue in the 19th century. The psychiatrist or alienist probing the nature of mental disease of abnormal ideation, hallucination, delirium, melancholia, mania, the surgeon performing operations with the aid of hypnotism, the magnetizer claiming to correct the disequilibrium in the universal flow of magnetic fluids, but who soon came to be regarded as a clever manipulator of the imagination, the physiologist, and the physician who puzzled over sleep, dreams, sleepwalking, anesthesia, the influence of the mind on the body in health and disease, the neurologist concerned with the functions of the brain, and this physiological basis of mental life, the philosopher, interest in the will, the emotions, consciousness, knowledge, imagination, and creative genius, and last but not the least, the psychologist. These are the terms that we came across. Now, when we talk about the enrichment of the language, the enrichment of the time-honored expressions, these are some of the terms that were coined in the 19th century, and this is the concept that is a part of the unconscious. So all these fleeting ideas, all these disparate ideas and conceptions could be put under one umbrella, that is unconscious. And this is exactly what the passage is trying to tell us. Significantly, most of it, all of these practices, for example, hypnotism in surgery or psychological magnetism, originated in the waning years of the 18th century and during the early decades of the 19th century, as did some of the disciplines, such as psychology and psychical research. The majority of topics too were either new or assumed, hitherto unknown facts, which until now was unknown. Thus, before 1790, few, if any, spoke in medical terms of the affinity between creative genius and the hallucination of the insane. So all these things, they belong to one concept. They could be put under one concept, that was an unconscious. And we, the human beings, we live with all these ideas which are a part of the unconscious that we are talking about in the passage. Striving vaguely and independently to give expression to a latent conception, various lines of thoughts can be brought together by some novel term. The new concept that serves as a kind of resting place or stock taking in the development of ideas, giving satisfaction and a stimulus for further discussion or speculation. Thus, the massive introduction of the term unconscious by Hartmann in 1869 appeared to focalize many stray thoughts. Okay, bringing together many stray thoughts. All right, focalize many stray thoughts, affording a temporary feeling that a crucial step had been taken forward, a comprehensive knowledge gained, a knowledge that required only further elaboration, explication, and unfolding in order to bring in a bounty of higher understanding. Ultimately, Hartmann's attempt at defining the unconscious proved fruitless because he extended its reach into every realm of organic and inorganic, spiritual, intellectual, and instinctive existence, severely diluting the precision and compromising the impact of the concept. What kind of concept? The concept of the unconscious. This is what we have been talking about. All right. Question number 9, it talks about the enrichment of the literary and intellectual language. This enrichment resulted in an altered understanding of the meanings that underlie the time-honored expression and traditional catchwords. Which of the following interpretations of this sentence would be closest in meaning to the original? What actually are we talking about in this case? Right? The enrichment, okay, upgrading or changing, okay, what? The intellectual language, the language which was actually present, the language which meant something else, or the original meaning of the language was, something before, but with the coming of the unconscious, we saw new meanings being given to the language used and the expression used. So in this case, if you look at one, it says all the options are listed here. First option says time-honored expressions and traditional catchwords were enriched by literary and intellectual language. Okay, it was enriched by literary and intellectual language. Now, this has a slightly different meaning. The expressions and the catchwords were improved, were enriched by literary and intellectual language. 3 says literary and intellectual language was altered by time-honored expression. So we are talking about a change that is taking place over here. It was altered by time-honored expression. 4 says the meaning of time-honored expressions were changed by innovations in literary and intellectual language. The meaning of time-honored expressions were changed. So out of these four, if you look at 4, what does 4 tell you? Right? 4 tells you that the meaning of time-honored expressions, right? The expressions which were already there, that changed. How did it change? It changed by innovations in literary and intellectual language. 4 is the answer. 3, literary and intellectual language was altered by time. It slightly changes the impact of the meaning. 2 talks about time-honored expressions and traditional catchwords were enriched. No, actually, the meaning of the time-honored expressions, they got redefined. Okay, That changed. So that's why the answer in this case should have been the fourth option. Okay. Let us look at the next one. All of the following statements may be considered valid inferences from the passage except, right? What can be considered a valid inference from the passage except? One is invalid. What is invalid? If you look at one says 18th century thinkers were the first to perceive a connection between creative genius and insanity. 2 says new conceptions in the 18th century would provide new knowledge because of the establishment of fields such as anesthesiology. 3 says without the linguistic developments of the 19th century, the growth of understanding of the soul and mind may not have happened. 4 says unrelated practices began to be treated as related to each other and as knowledge of the mind grew in the 19th century. Let's talk about option 1. It talks about 18th century thinkers were the first to perceive a connection between creative genius and insanity. It can be interpreted from the passage, right? 2 says new conceptions in the 19th century could provide new knowledge because of the establishment of the fields such as anesthesiology. Hang on. Do we find a mention? We are talking about the unconscious. We talked about so many different definitions and terms. But have we come across anesthesiology? If you go back to the passage, we have spoken about so many things, illusions, haunted houses, and all these things, right? Surgeon performing operations with the aid of hypnotism, right? We have spoken about the physiologist and the physician who puzzled over sleep, dreams, and sleepwalking. We have spoken about anesthesia. We have spoken about the influence of the mind. But where in the passage have we spoken about anesthesiology? So keep it in consideration. 3 says, without the linguistic developments of the 19th century, the growth of understanding of the soul and the mind may not have happened. Even this can be interpreted. This is exactly what the passage is telling you. Okay, new things coming into the picture, new things forming the unconscious that we have been talking about. 4 says unrelated practices began to be treated as related to each other as knowledge of mind grew in the 19th century. So out of all these things, 4 can also be interpreted. It is a valid inference which can be drawn from the passage. What cannot be drawn from the passage is this word anesthesiology. It does not find a mention in the passage. Hence, we are going to stick with 2. All right. Look at the next question. Which of the following sets of words is closest in mapping the main argument of the passage? Okay, closest to mapping the main argument. What kind of words and phrases map the main argument of the passage? 1 talks about imagination, magnetism, and psychiatry. 2 talks about literary language, unconscious, and insanity. 3 talks about unconscious, latent conception and dreams. 4 talks about language, unconscious, and psychoanalysis. So out of these 4, imagination, magnetism, and psychiatry, some of them may have been referred passingly, but they cannot form the sum and substance of the passage. Literary language, unconscious, insanity, they don't map the arguments. The argument is absolutely straightforward. We're talking about the unconscious. We're talking about the change of language, the enrichment of the language. We're talking about psychoanalysis. So out of these 4 options, 4 should have been the right option. So for question number 12, the option is 4. That is the right option. Let us look at the next passage. This was one passage which most of the students, they think that this was a pretty doable passage. Okay, this is one passage the students found absolutely close to. They can relate to what was being talked about in the passage. Okay, we are talking about the X-Men comics, right? And it was quite an interesting topic, quite an interesting passage, and the students found it very, very easy to read, but though some of them found it difficult to answer the questions, But let us see what the passage has to tell us, and then we will try to drive home the answers. All right, let us see what the passage has to tell us. Okay, it says back in the early 2000, an awesome thing happened in the new X-Men comics. Okay, our mutant heroes had been battling giant robots called our mutant heroes. I'm sorry, Anuj, if I have missed your answer. It was not what I was meant to do, right? I actually lost the connection. I was trying to connect with you people from my other device. I'm sorry if I have given you that kind of feeling. Apologies, right? I'm not trying to turn a blind eye on any of you. We are discussing something very important and interesting. Probably if you could just ask me your question once again, I will try to answer that question, right? Apologies if I have given you that impression. Okay, so this passage talks about the X-Men comics. Our mutant heroes had been battling giant robots called Sentinels for years, but suddenly these mechanical overlords spawned a new threat. What was that threat? Nano Sentinels, not content to rule Earth with their metal fist, these tiny robots invaded our bodies at the microscopic level. Infected humans were slowly converted into machines, cell by cell. And this is this is what we were given to understand by the new X-Men comics. All right. All right. Now, a new wave of extremely odd robots is making at least part of the Nano Sentinel story come true. Extremely odd robots is making at least part of the Nano Sentinel story come true using exotic fabrication material like squishy hydrogels and elastic polymers. Researchers are making autonomous devices that are often tiny and that could turn out to be more powerful than an army of Terminators. Some are 1 centimeter blobs, that can skate over water. Others are flat sheets that can roll themselves into tubes or matchstick-sized plastic coils that act as powerful muscles. No, they won't be invading our bodies as turning us into sentinels, which I personally find a little disappointing, but some of them could one day swim through our bloodstream. Okay, and this is what the author is wondering about, fancying about. They could also they could also clean up pollutants in water or fold themselves into different kinds of vehicles for us to drive. And this is what the author envisions, you know. And we are talking about robotics. And this is what the author's utopia is. Unlike a traditional robot, which is made of mechanical parts, these new kinds of robots are made from molecular parts. The principle is the same. Both are devices that can move around and do things independently. But a robot made from smart materials might be nothing more than a pink drop of hydrogel instead of gears and wires. It's assembled from two kinds of molecules, some that love water and some that avoid it, which interact to allow the bot to skate on top of a pond. So these are some of the functions which these new kind of robots, may perform, and this is exactly what the author is trying to tell us. The various functions. Sometimes these materials are used to enhance more conventional robots. One team of researchers, for example, has developed a different kind of hydrogel that becomes sticky when exposed to a low voltage zap of electricity and then stops being sticky when the electricity is switched off. This putty-like gel can be pasted right onto the feet or wheels of a robot when the robot wants to climb a shear wall or scoot across the ceiling. It can activate its sticky feet with a few volts. Once it is back on a flat surface again, the robots turn off the adhesive like a light switch. Again, we are talking about some of the unique functions being performed by the robots in question. Okay, last paragraph tells us robots that are wholly or partly made of glue aren't the future that I was promised in science fiction, but definitely the future I want. Okay, point to be noted over here. I'm especially keen on, this is what the author wants to see, on the nanometer scale, soft robots that could one day swim through our bodies. Metin City, a director at the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems in Germany, worked with colleagues to prototype these tiny synthetic beasts using various stretchy materials such as simple rubber and seeding them with magnetic microparticles. They are assembled into a finished shape by applying magnetic fields. The results look like flowers or geometric shapes made from Tinkertoy ball and stick modeling kits. They are guided through tubes or fluid using magnets and can even stop and cling to the sides of a tube. Okay, quite an easy read this passage was. Now let us hit the questions. Which of the following statement best captures the sense of the first paragraph? Okay, let us go back to the first paragraph. We are talking about new X-Men comics. Our mutant heroes have been battling giant robots. Alright. One says, tiny sentinels called X-Men, infected people, gives us a totally different meaning. People who were infected by nano-sentinel robots became mutants who were called X-Men. Again, goes against the fabric of the first paragraph. It's a different interpretation altogether. 3 says, the X-Men were mutant heroes who now had to battle tiny robots called nano-sentinels. If you look at this question, the best answer or the right answer, it stems out from the very first paragraph. It has to be the third one. The X-Men were mutant heroes who now had to battle tiny robots called nano-sentinels. Okay, 2 gives us a different meaning, 1 gives us a different meaning, 4 is out of question. So 3 should have been the answer. Let us look at question number 4. Which of the following scenarios, if false? Now, such a lovely way to structure the question. Which one of the following scenario, if false, could be seen as supporting the passage? If false, could be seen as supporting the passage. If not X, then Y. Okay. 1 says, nano-sentinel-like robots are likely to be used to inject people to convert them into robots cell by cell. 2 says, robots made from smart materials are likely to become part of our everyday lives in the future. 3 says, there are 2 kinds of molecules used to make some nanorobots, one that reacts positively to water and the other negatively. 4 says, some hydrogels turn sticky when an electric current is passed through them. This potentially has very useful application. Now, if you look at question number 14, right, you will see that 2, if you negate 2, it does not support the passage. 1, nano-sentinel-like robots are likely to be used to inject people to convert them into robots. Is this the author's contention? No, the author actually dreads this idea of people getting converted into robots. If you negate this, that actually supports the passage. So 1 is a very strong option. We can keep this into consideration. Okay. Author, I am going to come back to the passage. Please stay with me. Alright, I will come back to the grandfather passage in some time. Alright, okay. 3 says, there are 2 kinds of molecules used to make some nanorobots, one that reads positively to water and other negatively. You cannot negate this. If this is false, it harms the very fabric of the passage. It does not support the main idea of the passage. This is what the author has been talking about. Okay, and quite positively. Some hydrogels turn sticky when an electric current is passed through them. Exactly. This is what we have been talking about somewhere over here. right? This potentially has very useful applications. Yes, you cannot negate this. So the only option, if negated, supports the paragraph, supports the passage, is one. Nano sentinel like robots are likely to be used to inject people, to convert them into robots. Cell. Okay. Let us look at the second last question in the RC segment. Which of the following statement best summarizes the central point of the passage? Best summarizes the central point of the passage. The field of robotics. Summary of the passage. The field of robotics is likely to be the future more and more in comics like X-Men, right? In comics like X-Men. The nanorobots made from molecules that react to water have become increasingly useful. Nanorobots reacting to water have become increasingly useful. Robots will use nanorobots on their feet and wheels to climb walls and move on ceilings. Once the stuff of science fiction, nanorobots now feature in cutting edge scientific research. Okay, with all these points being mentioned, 4 actually draws home the substance of the passage, how robotics is changing, the future, and how is it adding to the scientific research. So 4 is the best option that actually summarizes the passage in the best possible way. All right. So this is what we wanted to discuss as far as the RC passages were concerned. As most of you have been asking me to go back to the grandfather clock passage, let me take you back to the passage once again. All right. Okay. And now let us talk about the questions that you have been asking me. Okay, which question should I take you to? The grandfather clock. The guys who were asking me questions on grandfather clock. Okay. Utkarsh says, please discuss question number 13 once. Let me take you to question number 13. Okay. Right. Which question do you have doubts in? Vishal says question number 13. Utkarsh also says question number 13. Which of the following statement best captures the sense of the first paragraph? Let me take you to the first paragraph. Okay. Back in the early 2000s, something happened in the new X-Men comics. Our mutant heroes, these heroes who were mutants, the heroes who were mutants, had been battling giant robots called Sentinels for years. But suddenly, these mechanical overlords spawned a new threat: nano sentinels. Okay, robots getting changed into nano sentinels, not content to rule Earth with their metal fists. These tiny robots invaded our bodies at the microscopic level, infected humans were slowly converted into machines cell by cell. But exactly what is the question? The question is, which of the following statement best captures the sense of the, what is the sense of? One says, tiny sentinels called X-Men. Were X-Men called tiny sentinels? No. People who were infected by nano sentinels robots became mutants who were called X-Men. So this is something which you have to understand. The people who were infected by nano sentinel, did they become X-Men? 3 says the X-Men who were mutant heroes who now had to battle tiny robots called nano sentinels. Is this not what the first paragraph tells us? Okay, and none of the options listed here, right? So the 3 captures the essence in the best possible way, neither 1 nor 2, right? This goes against the information that has been furnished in the very first paragraph, isn't it? Okay, let me take you through the other questions quickly, and if time allows us, we are going to come back to the grandfather clock passage once again. I did go back to the passage, but none of you responded. I'm so sorry. Can I just look at the other questions so that I can, if time allows us, we are going to come back to the grandfather clock question. I promise you that. Utkarsh, question number 8, I noted it down. We will come back to that question again. The nowhere mentioned X-Men had to fight nanorobots. But suddenly these mechanical overlords spawned a new threat. Okay? Nano said, now not content to rule Earth with their metal fists, these tiny robots, even if it is not mentioned there, Vishal, but if you look at the question, 2 cannot be drawn either, right? 3 is not the right kind of inference, right? The X-Men have been fighting robots, even though they have changed their shapes and sizes. So it can be inferred that these X-Men, these X-Men who were mutants, now they had to fight tiny robots called nano sentinels. Okay, although it is not mentioned clearly in the passage, but it can be strongly inferred from the essence that the first paragraph has to make. Okay, all right. So this was all about the RC passages that we had to discuss. Now let's go to question number 17, right? It is about now some verbal logic questions. The first passage is all about this question is all about proper sequencing means parajumble question. Okay. So let us read the question properly and then we'll try to figure out the answer. One says businesses find automation such as robotic employees a big asset in terms of productivity and efficiency. 2 says, but in recent years, robotics has had increasing impacts on unemployment, not just of manual labor, as computers are rapidly handling some white collar and service sector work. 4 says, for years, politicians have promised workers that they would bring back their jobs by clamping down on trade, offshoring immigration. 4 talks about economists based on their research say that the bigger threat to jobs now is not globalization but automation. So if you look at this entire setup carefully, you will find that this cannot start the sequence. It cannot be the introductory sentence. Such robotic employees. It has to have a referent, right? It cannot start the sentence, the introduction, right? Starts with a conjunction. Look at 3 and 4. 3 talks about for years politicians have promised workers that they would bring back their jobs. So we can start the sentence like this. For years politicians have promised workers that they would bring back their jobs by clamping down on trade, offshoring and immigration. So if you look at these points mentioned, right? Clamping down on trade, offshoring and immigration, and 4 talks about economists say that bigger threat to jobs now is not globalization but automation. These are a part of globalization, okay? And these are not threats, that's what the economists are saying, but automation. And this automation is being talked about in 1. So 3 plus 4 is a mandatory pair, 4 plus 1 is a mandatory pair. Such robotic employees, business find such robotic employees a big asset in terms of productivity and efficiency. But in recent years, robotics, okay, robotics that finds a mention in 1, right, it is being discussed in 2 as well. So 1 plus 2 is a mandatory pair at the same time. Okay, so the option over here should have been 3, 4, 1, 2. That is the right arrangement. 3, 4, 1, 2. All right. Question number 8. Summary. Choose the option that best captures the essence of the passage. Let us see quickly what the passage has to tell us. The passage says, people view idleness as a sin and industriousness as a virtue. What is idleness? Sin. What is industriousness? The ability to work hard. Virtue. and in the process have developed an unsatisfactory relationship with. Okay, although industriousness is a virtue, still in the process their relationship with job is not very satisfactory, despite of the fact that they believe in industriousness or working hard. Work has become a way for them to keep busy. So what is work for them? A medium to keep themselves busy. Even though many find their work meaningless, in their need for activity, people undertake what was once considered work: fishing, gardening as hobbies. The opposing view is that hard work has made us prosperous and improved our levels of health and education. It has also brought innovation and labor and time saving devices which have lessened life's drudgery. So, summing up the paragraph, even though people find an unsatisfactory relationship between their with their jobs, and they although they value industriousness, the opposing view is hard work, right? Even though their relationship with job is unsatisfactory and they take up hobbies, hard work has made them prosperous and they have improved their levels of health and education. It has also brought innovation and labor and time saving devices, and they have lessened life's drudgery. So it underscores the importance of hard work. It underscores the importance of virtue. All right, the industriousness, hard work, and how hard work is important, how industriousness is important. Look at option 1. Option 1 tells you some believe that hard work has been glorified to the extent that it has become meaningless, okay, and led to greater idleness, but it has also had enormous positive impact on everyday life, right? This option tells you hard work has become meaningless, right? And it has led to greater idleness. Does the passage tell us that hard work has led us to greater idleness? 2 says, while the idealization of hard work has propelled people into meaningless jobs, people have idealized hard work. We are talking about hard work being a virtue, industriousness being a virtue that has propelled people into meaningless jobs. And since more people are into meaningless jobs, and that is why their relationship with job is unsatisfactory because they don't find meaning, although they want to keep themselves busy. But what is the opposing view? It has also led to tremendous social benefits from prosperity and innovation. Quite a close option. We can stick to it, but let us check 3 and 4. 3 says hard work has overtaken all aspects of our lives and has enabled economic prosperity, but it is important that people reserve their leisure time for some idleness. This line goes against the tempo of the passage. Okay, this line cannot sum up the tone of the passage, the idea of the passage. Okay, this goes against the very tone of the passage. This line, reserve their leisure time for some idleness. Nowhere in the passage does it mention, or is it mentioned that we have to keep some time, in spare for idleness, right? 3 is definitely not going to be the answer. 4 tells you, despite some detractors, hard work is essential in today's world to enable economic progress, for education and health, and to propel innovation that makes life easier. Despite some detractors. If you look at 2 and 4, we have idealized hard work and it has propelled people into meaningless jobs, right? This comes absolutely good in this line, right? But having said that, now if you look at this, it has also led, right? The opposing view, this line leads you to this expression. It has also led to tremendous social benefits from prosperity and innovation. Two contradicting views being kept together in order to bring home the essence of hard work. So 2 in this case should have been the answer. All right. Let us look at question number 19 very quickly. Again, it's a summary question. What does it tell us? Brazil's growth rate has been low. Yet, most Brazilians say their financial situation has improved. In spite of the fact that their growth rate is low, Brazilians say that their financial situation has improved and they expect it to get even better. All right. This is because most incomes are rising fast with higher minimum wages and very low unemployment. The result is falling. The result is falling inequality and growing middle class. Right? Till now, a very rosy picture has been drawn. The result of economic stabilization, improved social security and universal primary education. Okay? But the flip side starts from here. It begins from here. But despite recent improvements, the Brazilian economy is still painfully under. In spite of all these successes and rosy picture, Brazilian economy remains unequal, with poor Brazilian paying the biggest share of their income taxes, getting at least back, and getting the least back in government services. So what are we talking about? Growth rate being slow, right? Improvement in financial situation. In financial situation, we see an improvement. Okay. We also see, income arising fast, income growing. Okay. Improved social security and education, but economy remains unequal, right? Poor paying biggest share, so on and so forth. And they're getting, so these are the pointers. These are also some of the pointers. While there are quite a few positives to begin with, there are a few negatives also. So the assimilation of everything has to be there in the passage. Okay? All right. So one talks about with rising income and falling unemployment, most Brazilians are being misled into thinking that their economy is doing well. Are they misled into thinking? The Brazilians are misled into thinking that their economy is doing well. Two says economic reforms have benefited many Brazilians, but they are unaware of the impending problem from rising inequalities in their society. The problem that ensues because of inequality is not what we are talking about. Okay, this leads to an entirely new topic altogether. This cannot be the summary of the passage. 3 says most Brazilians feel that they have benefited from recent economic events, but the poor continue to be dealt unfairly by the state. And 4 says good economic indicators have masked, hidden the unfair taxation of the poor that is likely to destabilize the Brazilian economy in the next few years. Between 1, 2, 3, and 4, look at 3. Most Brazilians feel they have benefited from recent economic events. The first couple of lines prove it. But again, the latter part of the passage tells you that the poor continue to be dealt unfairly by the state. So 3 sums up the main points of the passage. So for question number 19, the answer should have been option 3. All right. Moving on to the next question, right? This talks about identify the odd one out. Okay. Let us see what are the pointers and how do we figure out the odd one out question. One says they often include foundation course on navigating capitalism with Chinese characteristic and have replaced typical cases from the US corporates with a focus on how Western theories apply to China's buzzing local firms. 2 talks about the best Chinese businesses who look like their Western rivals but are now growing distinct in terms of what they teach and the career boost they offer. 3 talks about Western schools have enhanced their offerings with double degrees, popular with domestic and overseas students alike, and boosted the prestige of their Chinese partners. 4 talks about for students a big draw is the chance to rub shoulders with captains of China's private sector. And 5 tells you their business courses are now largely catered to the growing demand from China in corporation, which has more global, richer, and ready to recruit from this Sinocentric student. If you look at these 5 lines, 5 is related to China and what China has to offer. 2, the best Chinese business schools look like their Western rivals but are now growing distinct in terms of what they teach and the career boost they offer. The Chinese people having an independent school, business school, and they are not following the what is being done in the West. So 2 also talks about the Chinese business school, what they do. If you look at all these 5 pointers, right, they often include foundation courses. So 2 and 1, they can make a mandatory pair. They are pairs, right? For students, a big draw is the chance to rub shoulders with captains of the China's private sector. With students, of course, the Chinese students, right? 5 also talks about the Sinocentric student body. Only 3 talks about what the Western schools have done. Okay, 3 talks about the Western schools, right? 3 talks about the Western schools, right? Whereas 1, 2, 4, and 5, they are actually talking about the Chinese schools and what are they teaching in their business schools. So 3 in this case is the possible answer, and this is going to be the odd one out. All right, that was question number 20 for us. I am trying to give you a holistic picture of the story. Ranjit, this I think this is something which you wanted to ask me. I am not trying to justify what actually CAT response sheet tells us, right? This is something what I think should have been the answer. We may have our differences. Wait till the details come out, and we are going to have the discussion once again. Okay, right? So we will wait for the results. Let us see what the future has in store for us, right? So we may have our differences, but this is how the things look like as of now. The response sheet, of course, they have given us their own possible options, but there has to be a reason why those answers were the ones that they have come up with. Okay, and why are we? You may not have been wrong, I may not have been wrong, but that according to CAT was the best answer. All right, with that being said, let us look at question number 21. It also asks for proper sequencing of the sentences. Let us look at the options, the pointers. Restitution of artifacts to original cultures could face legal obstacles, as many Western museums are legally prohibited from disposing of their collections. 2 says, this is in response to countries like Nigeria, which are pressurizing European museums to return their precious artifacts looted by colonizers in the past. 3 says, museums in Europe today are struggling to come to terms with their colonial legacy, some taking steps to return artifacts but not wanting to lose their prized collections. 4 tells us, legal hurdles notwithstanding, political and institutional, France and Germany would now like to defuse the colonial time bombs and are now backing the return of part of their holdings. Now, if you look at these options carefully, restitutions of artifacts, returning of the artifacts to the, okay, could face legal obstacles, and look at for legal hurdles notwithstanding, in spite of the legal hurdles, which means 1 and 4 is a mandatory pair, But if you look at 3 and 2, museums in Europe today are struggling to come to terms with their colonial legacy, right? This is one fact that we are talking about that is happening. The problem that is happening in that the museums in Europe are grappling with. Some taking steps to return the artifacts, but not wanting to lose their prized collections, right? This in response to countries this is in response to countries. This means what? Whatever we are talking about in 3. So 3 and 2 again is a mandatory pair. Okay, there's a very close connect. There's a very close connect between 3 and 2. So 3214 should have been the answer for question number 21. All right. Let us look at this question. Identify the odd one out. This one was a bit tricky, okay? But, a careful analysis of the options, will take you to the right answer, right? Look at one. One talks about a typical example is Wikipedia. Now, something might have been said earlier on, but let us read the pointers. A typical example is Wikipedia, where the overwhelming majority of contributors are male, and so the available content is skewed to reflect their interest. Okay, talking about males over here. 2 says, without diversity of thought and representation, society is left with a distorted picture of future options, which are likely to result in augmenting existing inequalities. We are talking about existing equalities, and that is growing with time. 3 says gross gender inequality in the technology sector is problematic, right? Now we come to the moot point of this paragraph. We are talking about gross gender inequality in the technology sector is problematic. And the example is this, okay? Not only for the industry-wide marginalization of women, but because technology designs embody the value of their makers. So even 3 talks about gender inequality. 4 says, while redressing unequal representation in the workplace is a step in the right direction, right? We are talking about redressal, finding a solution to something. Broader social change is needed to address the structural inequalities embedded within the current organization of work and employment. So if we look at 4, we are actually trying to find a solution to the problem. 5 says, if technology merely reflects perspectives of the male stereotypes, then new technologies are unlikely to accommodate the diverse social context within which they operate. All right. So while all the other options are talking about gender inequality and the problem that stems out from gender inequality and the impact it has had on technology, and Wikipedia is an example given, only one option talks about redressal and finding a solution, right? While the other options talk about the problems, only one option talks about redressal and solution and answer to the problem, and hence this option which talks about solution, right, to the problem should have been the odd one out. While the others talk about problems, 4 talks about the solution. That's why 4 should have been the right option over here. All right? Okay. Next question. 4 sentences labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, it's a parajumble question. Would yield a coherent paragraph. Decide on the proper sequencing of the order. All right. Let us read the question very quickly. 1 says, it is regimes of truth that make certain relationships speakable. Relationship-like subjectivities are constituted through the discursive formations which sustain regimes of truth. 2 says, relationships are nothing without the communication that brings them into being. Interpersonal communication is connected to knowledge shared by interlocutors and scholars should attend to relational histories in their analysis. 3 says, a Foucauldian approach to relationships goes beyond these conceptions of discourse and history to macro-level regimes of truth and constituting relationship. 4 talks about reconsidering micro-practices with relationships that are constituted within and simultaneously contributors to regimes of truth, acknowledges the central position of power knowledge in the constitution of what has come to be considered true and real. This question was again a bit on the tougher side, right? The technicalities, the jargons used was quite difficult and not easy to bring home the answer at the very first reading. So let us try to put these sense in order and put things in perspective, right? 2 should have started the sentence because we are talking about something called relationship or nothing without the communication that brings them into being. Them refers to relationship that comes into existence. Interpersonal communication is connected to knowledge, okay, shared by interlocutors and scholars, people who love to discuss, should attend to relation histories in their analysis. Okay, if you look at 3, a Foucauldian approach to relationship, continuing to extend the thought that we have started to talk about in 2, right, goes beyond these conceptions. These conceptions, the conceptions discussed in 2 of discourse and history to macro level regimes of truth as constituting relationship. Now, this regimes of truth finds a mention in 1. Look at the tone of the paragraph. To macro level regimes of truth, it is regimes of truth, okay, continuing the same thought, which means 3 and 1. 3 and 1 is a mandatory pair. 2 must start the sequence and 4 must end it. Okay, reconsidering micro practices within relationship that are constant. This must end the sequence. So the proper sequence should have been 2, 3, 1, 4. All right. Again, the last question of the day, we are going to talk about alternate summaries over here. It says choose the option that best captures the essence of the passage. Let us read the passage quickly and try to see what the answer was. It begins with the human mind once again. Human mind is wired to see patterns. Okay? Not only does the brain process information as it comes in, it also stores insights from all our past experiences. Every interaction, happy or sad, is catalogued in our memory. Intuition draws from that deep memory well to inform our decisions going forward. In other words, intuitive decisions are based on data. Okay, we get some information over here. Intuitive decisions are based on data. Utkarsh, yes, I said I will visit question number 8 and I will do that exactly after this question. Okay, and not contrary to data as many would like to assume. When we subconsciously spot patterns, what happens when we do this? The body starts firing neurochemicals. Okay, the body starts firing neurochemicals in both the brain and gut. These somatic markers, what? The neurochemicals, okay, that actually, are the part and parcel of the human mind. What does it tell us? What gives us instant sense that something is right or that it's off. Not only are these automatic processes faster than rational thought, but our intuition draws from decades of diverse qualitative experience, sight, sounds, interaction, etc., a wholly human feature that big data alone could never accomplish. All right. Answers. Intuition is finitely richer than big data. which is based on rational thought and accomplishes more than what big data can. 2 says intuitions are automatic processes and are therefore faster than rational thought, and so decisions based on them are better. 3 says intuitions are neurochemical firings based on pattern recognition and draw upon a rich and vast database of experience. 4 says intuition draws from deep memory and may not be related to data, right? Now, hang on. When you are reading the fourth one, right, we know that intuitive decisions are based on data, right? This line negates what is being said in the passage, so 4 is out of question. Are you with me? Yes? Okay. 3 says intuitions are neurochemical firings based on pattern recognition and upon and draw upon a rich and vast database of experience. Number one, we are talking about these neurochemicals being fired, and that is what intuition is all about, and intuitions being based on rich database. So this is a very strong option to be considered. Let us look at 1 and 2 at the same time. Intuitions are automatic processes. We're talking about intuitions being automatic and are therefore faster than rational thought, and so decisions based on them are better. Nowhere in this passage we are talking about the intuitions being dependent on data. Okay, this gives you just one side of the story, and that too it is quite skewed in nature. One says intuition is infinitely richer than big data, right? This is something which is quite controversial. We are not saying that intuition is infinitely richer than big data. That is why the best option for this question should have been 3. Intuitions are neurochemical firings based on pattern recognition and draw upon a rich and vast database of experience, clearly showing that it is dependent on data. Okay, so this was quite an easy question to answer. Now, as all of you have been talking about, let us go back and together try to find out what question number 8 should be like. One of you said, sir, let's go back to question number 8. Let us go back to question number 8. Okay. Okay, question number 8. The author makes all of the following arguments in the passage except. Okay, look at 3. There is no difference in accuracy between an inefficient grandfather clock and an atomic clock. Is this not mentioned in the passage? There is no difference in accuracy between an inefficient grandfather clock and an atomic clock. Now, what is your contention? What is your contention? Do you have the answer key in front of you, Anuj? The response sheet? All right, all right. I would request you to visit the response sheet once again, and if at all we can come back to this passage, in future, let us discuss it. See, the question was quite straightforward. The author makes all of the following arguments in the passage except one argument that it does not make. Okay, one argument that it does not make. Does he say that there is no difference in accuracy between an inefficient grandfather clock and an atomic clock? If you go back to the passage, right? Somewhere in the passage, he talks about if you look at this one, hence a large inefficient grandfather clock isn't more precise. When you say isn't more precise, right? This is nothing but, and this is exactly what the question tells you. Okay, this is what? This is just a restatement. Okay, this is just the restatement of the passage. Whatever is stated in the passage has been worded in a bit different way in this particular option. Okay, so restatement cannot be taken, right? as an inference. It is mentioned there. It is categoric. Okay. So 3 can be left out. And out of 2 and 3, I know we can have our agreements, but out of 2 and 3, 2 would have been a slightly better choice. Okay. So this was what the discussion was all about. VS Lot 3. And if you really want to check your score, please, the link is given in the description box. Check your CAT 21 score right now. Log into our website and check the score. All right. And today we have come to the end of the detailed analysis of slot 1, 2 and 3. All the sections have been duly covered and you have been a lovely audience who have stayed through the discussion. I hope you have, there have been a lot of takeaways, positives and negatives, right? And that's how we have come to the end of the discussion of slot 3 VARC. Please like the session if you have found it at all interesting. Leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe to BYJU'S Exam Prep. With that being said, I wish you all the very best for your upcoming CAT result. Wish you all the best and stay happy. Good night, all of you.